Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Player Engage podcast. Greg here. Today, we are joined by James Gallagher. He's the head of community management at Keyword Studios. And this is going to be a really fun conversation. We're going to get to learn how you build a community, the skills around it, what you want to look for. James has a great career from everything from Keywords today, from Techland, eBay, Rockstar, Sony. So tons of big name companies you have known, and you can understand how you build these communities. So James, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to pick your brain. Anything you want to share that I didn't introduce about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. No, it's a very comprehensive introduction. Thank you. I'm James. I'm head of community at Keywords. We have an incredible team of kind of 145 community managers all around the world, 31 different countries. And I mean, the cliche that we always share is that community managers historically wear a lot of hats. There's kind of a number of aspects to the role. I mean, people's definition of a community manager can vary from someone that creates social media content to talking to players on communities like Discord servers and subreddits. Sentiment analysis is a big part of what we do. Dealing with crisis situations, the list can go on. So we have an amazing crew all around the world that can kind of provide all of those services to our clients. So yeah, happy to answer any questions that you have on what we get up to.
I love that you just started listing out the roles because I feel like that alone could probably be an hour. Because I mean, you've been doing community management. I mean, just looking at your LinkedIn for since the early 2000s, right? And that's, I think back then, community management, while it was a thing, was more of like a foreign language to a lot of us, right? The communities were probably a little smaller, right? They were in different places, right? Maybe they were on Facebook more often. There still are, right? And Reddit and social, and we've grown since then, and communities have become stronger. And most of the big games that you see, not even big games, I mean indies as well, right? That are popping right now are because they build strong communities. So I have a lot of questions. I'm just going to throw a dart to see where I want to start. The first one would be is when you got started with community management, can you talk about a little bit what the landscape was and how you have seen it grow yourself over the past couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I started my first job in gaming, let's say, was as a copywriter that was at PlayStation. So that was I was a journalist before then, and then I came over to be a copywriter. So I was writing for PlayStation.com. That was the official kind of company website, and it was the kind of thing you see on a company website: descriptions of the game, almost like the back of the box kind of text, as back when we had boxes and they had text on the back of them. Yeah, so it was writing. There wasn't really any interactivity with it. And Around about that time, it was like that's when companies started using social media. And it was really the kind of the nascent days of that. I think in PlayStation in particular, it was something that had been happening in the US, and they were looking to kind of launch that for Europe. So I took that over. It was almost it was like a new platform, really. I think online communities have existed for an awfully long time. Pretty much as long as the internet's been around. And I think even before that, companies like PlayStation, they had official forums and things like that. So what we think of as communities now. What happened around about that time is social media really came in and really started to drive the conversation around what we think of as online communities and how brands interact with their fans. I think actually, side point, we've come full circle in many ways in that we start to think now about community management as people building spaces for people to interact with each other, a bit like we did before social with things like forums. But yeah, so that was really the jumping off point for me. I think the thing about it was I was used to writing for websites and then suddenly there was a reply section, and that became quite intoxicating. If I'm quite honest, you're like, wow, I can put this stuff out, and immediately you're seeing this response, good or bad, as is always the case. I think that's pretty compelling. Back in the day, you're right, it was on Facebook primarily initially, and this is Facebook before advertising, so the kind of organic reach that you would get from pretty much anything you put out was just vast. It was massive. So it was kind of you'd put out any kind of short message and you just get comment after comment. So it was quite fun. And yeah, that like I said, that was the jumping off point. and then went on to work for, obviously, with a company like Sony. You're working with lots of different game publishers, lots of different games all the time, constantly, like lots of titles, and then went on to work more with specific game developers, like you said, Rockstar and Techland was focused more on a specific title or a couple of games, and then it, for me personally, it was about really going deep into a particular fandom. I think probably something like Grand Theft Auto was like the kind of the ultimate of that, really, of getting to go see, especially when we launched five. Uh, I mean, a very, very large fan base, really sort of getting under the hood of that. And, we getting into those sort of, regular interactions, also, a lot of the work we used to do, which didn't get talked about so much, was via email. Actually, we used to get a lot of fans email us, and we were very kind of dedicated to directly responding to fans' emails and things like that. A lot of one-to-one kind of fandom building and interaction, which was super interesting. And then, yeah, I mean, I could keep going on, or feel free to sort of guide me into
Well,
what you want to
it's
know. But
yeah, no, I'm curious. It's funny because you talk about Sony, right? Which beginning of we'll call it beginning of the internet. It's not, right, but you're describing just, hey, here's what Twisted Metal is, whatever, right? And then all of a sudden fans start reaching back out. You have a reply section. You have Facebook. You're working with Rockstar during the launch of GTA 5, which is nuts because here we are 14 years or 12 years later, right, talking about GTA 6. But at a certain point, they're on Facebook where they're becoming more of conversational, right? And now we're in the world where we're going to Discord where it's pure conversation. And when we talk about this, it reminds me to like the early days of AOL when you had chat rooms, right? It seemed like for a while the chat room disappeared. And now it's kind of re-emerging a chat room, but in the form of Discord, where you have a lot of back and forth conversation, right? Back in the day, and I'll make an assumption here and feel free to smack me down like I'm wrong, right? Like when you're managing Facebook, you're looking at the posts real time, they're coming in, you can delete them, you can do that. But with Discord, conversations are moving fast, right? So like, how do you stay on top of a Discord conversation, make sure it stays on course? Or I mean, this is probably an impossible to answer question, right? But like, how do you even begin monitoring one of these channels to understand the types of conversations that are going on since they're happening so quickly and so spread apart?
yeah, that's. I mean, you're right. Things have, from early days of chat rooms and things, and that sort of feels like it's come back around. I think it was always there. Um, I think particularly with companies getting more involved with that again, that's something that's picked up over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years, with things like Discord and Reddit. I think the whole industry of what we community management really did become quite fixated on social for about a decade, and I think that now it's more universally understood that they serve different purposes. I think when we think about social media as something, phenomenal tools for creating an audience, and then when we start to think about something like Discord or subreddit, great for building a community. And the distinction between an audience and a community is, with a community, you really, what you're looking to do is create a space for people to talk to each other. And I think you in a way, if you've done your job right, yes, you want to kind of continue to provide information and talking points and activities and keep that space fresh and interesting. But ultimately, your success is are people just kind of chatting with each other, excuse me, and having a good time. Versus, obviously, with social, it's that thing of you do need to constantly be putting out content. Yeah, I mean, sure, there's a comment section, but if you stop posting, that comment section very, very quickly withers, and it's like so that's why we think of audiences versus communities. And I mean, onto the monitoring part. I mean, look, we have community managers, and they live in those channels day in, day out. I think we use tools to monitor things, which I'll come on to in a second. We use technology to monitor these communities at scale. I mean, actually, though, you'll still find that your community manager's sense of what's going on will more often than not be on the money. Of just monitoring conversations, being involved, seeing what the kind of temperature is. But yeah, clearly there's a need for something more at scale, more scientific. So I suppose two parts of your question. One is the sentiment and understanding of what's being talked about. There's a number of tools out there that we use and that people will be aware of that can help sort of ingest all of those, not just on Discord, but across the web, and categorize and tag. I think those tools have come on leaps and bounds in the last 2-3 years. I mean, to the point where I think they were a little bit, people in the industry were sort of somewhat dubious about them. Especially the one that you used to hear a lot was that in gaming, they struggle with the way that people talk about video games. People use language that would, in any other context, be ostensibly considered, say, negative, or
Sure, in gaming, you can go say, "I'm going to shoot you in the head," and that's okay
that's
in gaming.
there's things like that. I mean, when I was at Techland, I worked on a game called Dying Light Bad Blood, and it was kind of all of the any of those word kind of association sentiment tools would just be alarm bells with everything, because these were sort of, the game was called sort of bad words in inverted commas. But no, those tools have really come on leaps and bounds. I think they're super useful now, and I think moderation would be the other part that you're alluding to, which that's obviously where it is super critical to really have a close eye on things. And similarly, that's where I think the tools available to us now have really improved and made that job a lot easier to do at scale.
So, sorry, I had you brought something up that I wanted to dig into, right? You talked about audience and community building, which is important. And I think most people we talk to tend to think this is a gaming specific thing, right? And we have people that listen that aren't in gaming. Surprisingly, a good amount of our audience aren't in gaming, but they're in customer success. And I try to tell them that community building, no matter what vertical you're in, is something that should be focused on, because a strong community will help build a brand. But are you mostly only doing gaming? Like, what are the types of communities you think are out there that need this type of monitoring? And just like, what verticals should people be focusing on if it's stuck to a vertical?
So, I mean, first of all, if I mean, we're in the business. I mean, we could go on and talk about things like local communities, and this could to try and keep us focused. I mean, I think we're obviously talking more about in the realm of brands and businesses, and yeah, I mean, we could look at things like sport. I mean, if you look at sport, if you look at fandom first and foremost as being almost like the umbrella term, fandom in sport is just is what drives it, right? It's kind of it's crazy, the level of fandom in sport. And then, so within that fandom, there will be lots of communities, right down from kind of local supporters group of a certain team, people who are in a similar physical location that will kind of get together and like travel to matches together, and they'll kind of help each other out. And that collaboration between them, they're kind of collaborating to, and they're kind of feeding off each other as well, like sharing that kind of fandom. To there will be certain communities, online communities around about that team. Most sports teams have a subreddit, right, and increasingly have a Discord server, and that's kind of where people will just get together. Generally, sports is an interesting one, because if there's a match going on, sports is all obviously around events happening live. And when there's a match going on, there will be there'll be people that be watching the game on TV, but there will be a kind of thread where they're posting questions and like making little comments and things. That's they're kind of working together to kind of improve their experience of, there will be communities around an individual player, and there will be communities around things like the uniforms, as you would probably call them, or the kits, as we call them here. So you'll get all of these. So, but that's really, so I think sports is like huge for this, because and I think music is also something that's, I mean, really, wherever there's fandom, then there will be communities kind of, or as the sort of some of the pieces kind of in Lego blocks kind of build,
Well,
forming that fandom.
all right. Well, the truth is, community is kind of your hype man or woman these days, right? You build a community. I mean, look at Taylor Swift. She's got her Swifties that are relentless, probably better marketers than she is, right? And I think it comes down to building that community, because if you build fans and you communicate with your fans and you engage with your fans, they will be your fans for life, and that's being proven by Taylor Swift, as well as a lot of other companies out there that have these really strong communities. I think one of the questions that I always come to mind is like, and this would be a question for you, James, is if you were going to start an indie gaming company right now, how do you start building a community? Like what would be your approach to it? And obviously everything's a little different, but kind of how do you go about that from what you've seen?
I think if I was in that position, um, and I think this is not my idea, by the way. This is kind of well trodden ground at this point, I think. But I think a good place is thinking about an underserved niche or community or subsection of an existing community, that you can start a conversation with. It doesn't have to be huge to begin with. I think one of the often mentioned examples being Stardew Valley, of the in that genre. It's kind of a genre that had been around for a while, but there hadn't really been things like Harvest Moon. There really hadn't been anything kind of really blowing people's socks off in that space for a while. So I think from an early stage, when that game went from an idea and was being developed on, really brought those people on board, brought them into the development. And that's something that I talk to companies about now. If they're working on particularly kind of indie games, it's like, okay, who is this serving? Where do they currently show up online? Um, is there any? It doesn't necessarily even have to be the genre. I mean, that's quite a direct example. It's a game in a genre, but it can be kind of, maybe it's a character from a certain part of the world, or it can be something quite niche, like a location thing. Like I was talking to somebody recently about they're working on. I don't think I'm giving too much away by saying they're working on a game that's set in Paris, and I was like, oh, it's kind of that's cool. I haven't seen a game in Paris for quite a while. It has been. I was thinking about a game called The Saboteur, which is a bit of a deep cut from EA a few years ago. But yeah, I was kind of like, so then that started me thinking about like, oh, I wonder how you could start to sort of gather people around the idea of like, okay, it's been a while since there's been a Paris set game. But yeah, I mean, it's finding those little hooks really, and it's like, okay, how can we sort of, are there any of those hooks, or people who are already having a conversation about those, or ideally about the lack of those, and you can start to because then it's something for people to start talking about in an organic way. You're not kind of just kind of crowbarring something in there, joining existing conversations, and hopefully seeing if they can snowball and into something bigger.
Are those typically strategies you work with when you speak to a client or a prospect? You kind of sit down with them, hear their game, and when you first start talking about that, are there networks you immediately think of? Is it everyone goes Discord, everyone goes Reddit, or is there a strategy behind the channels you want to approach first?
I mean, I don't want to kind of over. At the end of the day, I think a lot of the projects that we work on professionally, in our team are kind of large, already quite well established communities, where you're not really doing that kind of drawing board kind of thinking. So I wouldn't say that it's something that we regularly sit down and strategize. I'm also not a strategist. I think if we had a community strategist here in this podcast, it'd probably be from one of our studios, then there'd be a slightly different response to that. But no, I'd say oftentimes this is just more um, thinking and out loud ideation, the conversations that I have with her, rather than something that we're sitting down and really building out. Because I think as well, it's something that's really really effective, kind of at the grassroots level, that I think that independent publishers and developers are doing themselves. There's a lot to be said for that, actually. Again, it's being a kind of an organic part of joining a conversation in a very organic way. I think it's kind of, we are at the end of the day, we are an agency, and there's always a slight kind of like, uh, is it as authentic as, like I said, somebody that's really building a game on their own, and people will, if there's something kind of manufactured about this approach, so it's something that people would sniff out. But
So to play kind of devil's advocate there, right? Sometimes a studio is so ingrained in their game, right, that they don't actually know the community aspect of it, right? There are certain times where maybe they're like, "Oh, we want to start this Twitter account," and you're like, "I don't think Twitter is the right channel for you." Is there kind of a time where you kind of step in and say, "This isn't the strategy you want to go with. Maybe you want to consider this because of your demographic."
yeah, I mean that obviously happens all the time, and that is and oftentimes as well, it's that I think that when people, it's difficult to try and be everywhere. I think oftentimes you see people, and they think, well, we've got to be everywhere. That's what you do, and you've got to be on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and Discord and Reddit, and you've got to have this whole suite of channels. And I think, to use a kind of a civilization analogy, I've always personally been more in favor of sort of building tall as opposed to building wide. Um, Particularly if you're on, we're talking about indie companies where maybe resources are stretched, and it's like, well, really, really putting all of your eggs into having a really thriving Discord server, and and a social channel to drive people to it. You might get more bang for your buck than limiting yourself to doing a bit everywhere. So yeah, that's a conversation that we have, and that comes up in those kind of more strategic conversations. And what's the right channel for a certain kind of game? I mean, we talk to some publishers and developers where the kind of game that they're developing, we question whether Discord is the right. It's sort of become quite ubiquitous now, but not always. We talked recently about, a very, very casual game that had, quite a specific audience demographic wise. Quite a kind of the general player base was quite a sort of older skew female player, and I thought, these days it's almost flipped. It almost flipped the sort of convention. These days, I think most conversations I have, it's like, yes, we must have a Discord, and questioning whether we need to have a Facebook page now. And because that was almost the flip of that. It's like, well, look, we probably should double down on Facebook. Question mark about Discord. So yeah, that comes into play for sure.
It's interesting because even for the podcast, right? I'll put the podcast out on every channel just because you need to in the beginning. But I could just tell you, like, Facebook is not the right place for it because I don't want to be showing off to my friends, right? Like, they're not necessarily the right people to be listening. But you kind of learn, like, all right, well, if I'm building a specific type of product and I want to show it off, that's probably more of an Instagram type of thing because it's imagery. So it's interesting to see how people start to adopt and learn about the channels that are right for them. From your perspective, well, I mean, I know what we just talked about, but what is the channel that no one should be skipping over today? Is it Discord, or is there something new that should be on the horizon? Is it TikTok, right? Like, is there a channel that almost is ubiquitous for anyone?
I mean, there's a caveat to every response, isn't there? That's the thing. Like, it's difficult to in universal terms. I think, look, if, as I said, if in gaming, it's a very much a 9 out of 10 now where there is a Discord. And the thing that we find extremely effective at the moment about Discord particularly is that when you're announcing a game, or you're putting out a trailer, or you're, any kind of key beat in your campaign where there's a call to action, ultimately you put out a piece of content. What do you want people to do next? And we find that driving people to a Discord server is an extremely effective call to action. So, which is great because, you put out a piece of content, and then, you're driving people to a space where then you can continue to communicate with them. They can talk with each other. So, a lot of value in that, and that, like I said, that's a call to action that really seems to be working at the moment. I think, it's easy to say TikTok, or as well as TikTok, to talk about short form video as a kind of social content that's working very well. But the caveat there is that, you have to be able to deliver in that format, strategically and creatively. It's a format that has specific requirements. Not only is it short, tall video, but the convention there is, you have people in front of camera, and there's humor. I mean, this is the thing that's really changed on social over the years, is that social's just another form of entertainment now. That's really that's how you capture people on social, is you entertain them, and humor is obviously, one of the sort of most common ways of doing that. So I think in gaming in particular, we used to think of social as being information and putting out information, and I still see that quite a lot as the default strategy is, we're putting out information on patch notes, and we're announcing things. And but now, I mean, now it's you're a form of entertainment. You've got to We work with a lot with our colleagues in DMM, which is part of Studio, which is they're very much rooted in the entertainment industry, and what they talk about all the time is that the purpose of social, is to entertain people when they're not watching the show or the movie. It's like when they're outside of that experience of watching the movie or things, but you keep them entertained in a similar way. And I often do this. I go off on. I've completely forgotten the original question,
No,
but
but
no,
you're
I think
you're you're
we
you're
were talking
nailing
about.
things that are interesting to me, because you know what I mean, we're in a new era, right? I call it new era, it's not, but like the rise of Twitch allowed me to start watching games instead of playing games, and now content creators are building stuff from within games, right? Half the people probably don't play some of these games out there. I love watching clips of Mortal Kombat, whatever the latest Mortal Kombat is. I don't necessarily love playing it, but I'll sit there and just watch people doing it. It fascinates me, and I think it's an interesting, again, that's your community working with you, right? Your community's taking your content and repurposing it for people that may not normally play the game, and you're sitting here, and you guys have to monitor this stuff, making sure it stays appropriate, right? In certain channels you can do that better than others, and it's just fascinating on how this is growing and how this content is being pushed to people, because this is a new way of advertising, right? Some companies won't even spend any money on advertising because they'll have some influencers playing the game, and that itself makes it kind of explode.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of it's new, and a lot of it just feels new and it's old. But I often come back to fandom as the kind of catch-all for what we're doing here, and it also helps me make sense of, because again, I think we talked about earlier about fandom in relation to sports and communities and things, and really that's like it feels like there's this spread of so much going on, and there's this vast spread. Take even just an individual game, take Mortal Kombat and things, and then you think about all of there's the official social channels and the official communities, but then all of the sub communities around certain aspects of the game or characters, or previous arcade versions from the 90s, and then you've got movies, and then you've got as you mentioned, streamers and content creators and cosplayers and fan art and all of these things. Like, it feels like, wow, it's sort of like an overwhelm of it all, but that really is just, that's the ecosystem of a fandom. There's loads of things going on, but they're all intertwined and they're all part of that same ecosystem, and they all um, and I think that, so we think about the, 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 the blocks that make that up, and the little parts of the ecosystem. Some parts of them we can control, some parts of them not so much, but we keep an eye on them, and they also have different purposes, and it's all ultimately, it's all people providing value to each other as well. That's what's really cool about it. Some, as you mentioned, sometimes some of those content creators that you watch or streamers that you watch, some of them will provide you pure entertainment, and some of them will provide you, maybe you want to get better at the game yourself, so you kind of want to learn, particularly with fighting games, I think, where there's that really, really deep, you know easy to play but impossible to master kind of learning curve with them. And maybe some of them you want to get opinions because you're thinking about whether you want to get a certain DLC or something. This is kind of like, but ultimately the one thing they have in common is they're creating value for their audience or for the other members of that community.
I want the record to show that I've been watching a lot of X Defiant clips on how to get better, and I am still terrible at the game. So take all those clips with a grain of salt, but they are great. Uh,
Well, that's a really good. I mean, that's a really good piece of strategic insight that's very common. Like, I mean, one of the things that we um, comes up a lot is, look, if a game has as a game as a competitive element to it, then there will pretty much always be a kind of a desire, some motivation for members of that fandom to learn and get better. So these are the strategic tidbits that you have, right? You could be like, well, look, there's a very strong motivation there. So at any aspect of how we work with that fandom, whether it's through influencer campaigns or building Discord servers or creating a social calendar, like, that's a great clue, right? That's a great clue to how to create value for people, or for to how to enable people to create value for each other. Because that's kind of, well, look, this is clearly of value, like really good educational information on how to get better at this game. is going to be of value. So you can build around that.
I love that you said it could be either or, because I think that's very fair, right? It could be value, it could be entertainment, it could be both. And I think both are just as powerful to a community, because different people in the community have different needs. Some are going to be those diehards that want to become first, and others just want to be there for the entertainment and watch the funny kills or something that's happening. So I love how you differentiated this, because I think both are important in fandom. And usually about halfway through, I like to do a fireball round, just kind of throw some random questions at you. So I think we're a little past halfway, but you good to go?
Sure, it depends on the fireball, but okay.
What do you have for breakfast?
Cornflakes.
All right. So you are at a bar. You can order any drink. What are you going to order?
Probably a coffee. I don't drink alcohol, but I'd go for a coffee. I'll take a coffee at any point.
Dream vacation.
Watching cricket in Sri Lanka.
Ooh, that's a first. I'll tell you that one. Um, if what's the last game you played?
Elden Ring last night.
And last question is, what show are you binge watching, or have you just finished binge watching?
Uh, I don't watch a lot of TV. There's it's niche, it's obscure. There's a series of documentaries by a documentarian called uh, Adam Curtis here in the UK. It was called The Century of the Self. There you go. Interesting, actually. It was about the birth of PR as a concept, public
Interesting.
relations.
All right, we'll check that out. You're off the hot seat. That was easy, right?
It was
So
quite easy, yeah. Like I said, the TV one always gets me because yeah, we
I
don't watch
usually
a
have a
lot.
book one, and that's the one that gets someone. Everyone's usually good on TV, so that's good that hey, you don't have to watch TV. You're probably in front of a screen most of the day anyway. I want to talk about your actual role as head of community management, the keywords, right? And something I'm just looking at your LinkedIn, right? You're managing, or your team's over 100, and that's a lot of people, right? And it's all different roles. So, from your perspective of your role, how do you manage that many people? How many times do you work with direct reportees, and kind of how do you scale?
Yeah, it's changed a lot over the years. I mean, it was developed over the years because I mean, I'd never managed anybody before this job, which was 5 years ago. Because I was a community manager, and generally we work with the fans, and but so it was pretty much a dramatic change going from managing nobody ever to if well dozens of people to begin with, and then it went up over 100, and yeah, it's developed. I mean, it's in a great place now. I think there is a great structure, and we have really good people, and I think generally that gets you. I know it's probably a bit of a cliche or a platitude, but having really really good people and all being wanting the same things and pulling in the same direction has made it kind of infinitely easier. And I think that we've always had very good development from within, which I think has helped us because we've grown so quickly. Pretty much just me to like 100. So that has obviously we've needed to create a structure in order for that to happen. So now we do have a kind of a structure of community managers and then leads and then project managers and then myself and also it's the opportunity for those people because obviously when you have people to fill those more advanced roles, then you have the opportunity for the people that have been community managers to step up and do that. I think more than 50% of what we would consider a kind of a people management role within our organization is filled with people that have been promoted to that role from within, which is good for everybody because I think everybody wants to advance. For us, there's that kind of familiarity of like, okay, you've worked with us, you kind of know how we work, you know what we aspire to, what we want to do. You can now bring that through to more people that we hire, get that kind of continuity. But no, I mean it's a this the simple answer is having a structure that makes sense. We've always had quite a narrow structure, I think, as we've organised our team. We've kept it quite, even as I mentioned before, even though that there's lots involved in being a community manager. There could have been a temptation, I suppose, to have been like, let's have a social team over here, let's have a Discord team over there, and then let's here have our data scientists, and let's have our art team here, and have that kind of spread of specialisms and departments and things. I think we've generally kept it quite narrow, and that's been great for consistency. I think hopefully most people in the team have a really good sense of the direction that we're pulling in, and what we value. We have even though we're in 31 different countries, I think we have a great sense of an internal community as well, which that's one of those kind of quirks in that you'd think that would be easy for us, right, to build a sense of community within our own team, given that it's what we do. But I think there's a sort of a syndrome of like, I don't know if you have any friends that work in construction. Um, I do have a few that were kind of builders and plumbers, and their own houses are just eternally unfinished projects. And I think that for a while, like it took us 2 or 3 years to really be like, okay, this is our community. This is kind of how that operates. But now the momentum's really there, and again, like people are really geographically diverse in our team, but then they come together quite often for game nights and book clubs and chats, and they play games together, and they're all united by that kind of online game culture anyway, which is such a throughfare. So yeah, that's does that cover it? It's
Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of people to manage. I guess going from the day to day of community management to managing, what was the biggest, for lack of a better word, shell shock to you? Like, oh, I am a manager now and not a community
um,
manager.
sort of not um, learning to be less involved. I think in some of the day to day, it's an obvious one. Um, I think that I often
Is that
joke.
something that came naturally to you? Is some people
No,
have a
no,
hard
not at
grip away
all. I
the
mean,
day to day?
I was, the team had already got up close to 100, and I think I was still, being quite involved in the day to day of how, helping out with ideation for social content and talking. It was good. I mean, I enjoy it. So, but you've got to also like, you got to step back and let people run that as well. Like it's sort of, I think I clearly remember like one of the first like longer holidays or vacations I went on in this role. I remember that being a really sort of positive threshold because I came back and realized that the team had just kept everything running so beautifully and solved any problems. And it just made me realize, yeah, I was probably too interfering or just doubling up really. Like you're there, and you need to leave people to do it.
You're afraid you leave, you come back, your house is going to be burnt down, but there it is, thriving, right? It's like a breath
No,
of fresh
exactly.
air. You're
No,
like,
it
oh,
was quite the opposite. It was tidier than it had ever been. um, no, so yeah, that's it's all. But we're all learning, aren't we? And it's that's one of the great things that, well, from my experience, the great thing about keywords is we've been able to build this team so quickly, and have that kind of entrepreneurial mindset in the team where people feel like they can build new capabilities and try things out, and that they'll be backed. So um,
so from the insider's perspective, are there any social channels that we should be keeping our eye on that are starting to kind of rise up in popularity, or is it kind of the known entities right now? Your Discords, your
I
Reddits, your Twitch.
yeah, I mean, I'm always like a little bit. I think after this many years, a little bit wary of the crystal ball questions, if you like, of trying to. I mean, I'm also notoriously bad at them as well. I mean, I'm gonna fess up and say, like, I was when I first kind of saw Twitch, I was like, yeah, that's not gonna catch on. Like what, and I think it's um I think that I talk to people, especially people about community management. I do some talks with some like charities in the UK of people looking to get into the games industry. I talk about this in terms of people talk about like what are the sort of skills that I guess that help you in this kind of a role, and I do hark back to most of the channels that we work on now didn't exist when I started. my career doing this kind of thing. So, I'm not going to pretend that I can predict what the next TikTok's going to be, but I think I will really evangelize that curiosity and adaptability, so that when it does come along, that you're excited about it, and you get past 40 like I do, and you try and switch off that natural kind of being slightly jaded about new things, and that you embrace them and try to understand what it is that people find appealing about them. What that would be, I don't know. There's nothing that front of mind that's super like emerging. I think there are a few channels that, with some of the transition from Twitter to X, and there are obviously a few channels that kind of popped up then that have been around for a while, like Mastodon, and they've kind of struggled for traction, and so no, I mean, I don't think I wouldn't call out anything in particular, and I think that there's some of the we have to remember as well is that because we work in gaming, oftentimes we are a little bit ahead of the curve of some other industries, if you like, and I guess more mainstream appeal. So really, if you look at what we're doing on Discord now, and I think that that's relatively nascent in other industries, that we talked about with sports. I mean, I think that's something that would be far more. You ask the average. I don't know what sports you like, Greg, whether it's basketball or kind of, but
football, any sport.
yeah. So I don't know what's your team.
Basketball, I don't really have a team. It's not my favorite. Football, my team is the New York Jets. I'm actually coming to London to see the Jets play this year. So,
Okay. So
I
do
don't
they
want.
have a Discord, New York Jets, like an official one, or is there any?
No, if they do, you know what? I've never. I do a lot of Discord. Discord's a channel, kind of what you were talking about, kind of the jaded time, same way you kind of looked at Twitch. Probably, I originally looked at Discord that way, and now I mean, I'm big into making coffee, so I'm a part of this like espresso group in there, and part of a Christmas I go crazy with Christmas lights. So I'm just like, wow, there really is a Discord for everything, and it's set up in such a great way where it's easy for anyone to consume the information there. Like, I've learned to truly love it. Like, just everything is there. And I know lately, the past few weeks, I pick your brain on the best way to scaling a Discord, because I truly think every company, for the most part, can benefit by having a community, even if it's only a few people, where you can like pick your customers' brains. Like, what do you like about this? What do you don't like about that? Right? Like, I don't know. I was like, why are they making another Slack clone? We don't need another Slack clone. And it blew me away by the capabilities of it. So I just went off on a tangent there. Sorry.
Oh yeah, we're talking about the New York Jets, and I mean, I don't know if they have one or not, but I think there's a few. I can see a future where that becomes much more of a kind of. I mean, do New York Jets have an Instagram? Like, I'm not even going to ask that
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. They have all that.
obviously,
I'm gonna
yes.
look it up in New York.
Obviously, yes. Like, it would be crazy if they didn't. Whereas, do they have a Discord? That would be a question mark. I think there's a future where that's like another obviously yes. So I guess that means it's still relatively nascent. There's some, the one channel. I mean, this isn't like new or trendy or glamorous, that I've always thought was a bit, particularly for brands, maybe underutilized, is like SMS, WhatsApp. I think used judiciously. Obviously, I think there's obvious like alarm bells that do customers want to be texted by companies? Is that what they want that channel for? But I think we've with some of our colleagues here, we've used a platform called Community. It's called Community, which is really unhelpful because it's focused on SMS. But they there's some really cool creative things you can do. I think particularly when you're talking, you can almost imagine like you're texting a character from a game as part of a campaign, or like some sort of like something a bit more interactive. I think and I think that some people would kind of love that, right? I mean, I'd be totally up for. I mean, I'm a civilization nut, and anytime that they drop new information on Seven, then I'd be totally up for getting a text or a WhatsApp, just to kind of make sure that I'm there in the know. But yeah.
Is it funny that as you get older, right, at least from my perspective, right, you start seeing trends in the industry again? I go back to like the AOL chat rooms day. And the truth is, again, Discord's not far from that. We had SMS, which I feel like at Helpshift, right, we tried to promote in-app support because you own that. But now the truth is, you can own your Discord, for lack of a better word. So why not push your users to Discord and kind of keep the community together? And again, I think there's these patterns you can see over time that repeat, and maybe they mature a little bit, but it's just fascinating to see as time goes on kind of how history repeats itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's consistent with those things? I mean, they're consistent. They're consistent needs, aren't they? Consistent behaviors, and I think that, um, again, like fandom really isn't anything new. Fandom. I mean, for me, it goes back to I guess the 50s and the 60s. Elvis Presley, the Beatles, and probably there's precedent for it before. I'm sure that maybe there was some kind of something we interpret as fandom in Roman Empire or something. I don't know, but like, um, if you look back at some of the behaviors then, way before online, fan clubs. It's like, I'm really into something. I wanna I wanna be with other people who are really into that. I kind of want to. I want other people to help fan the flames of my how much I love this thing. Like, um, and I also kind of want to create around that. I want to kind of create. I want to create fan art. I want to create fan fiction. I want to make my own music that sounds similar to them. I mean, we talk about the Beatles. That's kind of how the Beatles came about, really, wasn't it? They were listening to Chuck Berry and they were kind of Little Richard and they wanted to be like that. So yeah, I think it's something that's just in us all, really. There are all of these desires and motivations that we have, and I suppose we're just finding new ways to satisfy them, which is probably why you do see these kind of cyclical things looking quite familiar because they're all serving similar needs.
Trying to improve on what we did in the past, make it a little better, a little easier. Before we go today, James, there's a question I normally like to ask earlier, but I didn't. Is when you were growing up, right? What did you want to do for a living? Odds are, since it didn't exist, it wasn't being a head of community management. But what did you want to do? Was it rely on the copyright aspect of it, or?
I mean, I came to it quite late. I spent quite a long time trying to be a fighter pilot of all things, and right up until just before I went to university. And no, I mean, when I went to university and after I sort of abandoned that, I always enjoyed writing. So that was the thing that I think, I wanted to. I wouldn't even say I necessarily wanted to write, but I'm like, okay, that's something that at school I was pretty, I was always kind of good in those classes at school, and so that's probably something worth um, kind of following that thread really. So took English and then out of that journalism seemed to make sense. So it was more, I guess, I was quite a pragmatic kid. It wasn't so much like this is what I want to be. This is more like these are the things that I think I'm pretty good at. So I'm just going to kind of follow them through. It's a conversation I had quite recently actually, and because I've got two kids and I was listening to a podcast recently and I completely forget what podcast it was, but it was kind of around about changing the terminology really. Like instead of talking about this is what I want to be, which is kind of having like a vision of yourself and sort of being like, okay, I see myself. I think a classic one is a lot of people they love to kind of envisage themselves as a novelist. They love that version of themselves, but then actually struggle. Like don't necessarily secretly enjoy sitting down and writing. Like, that's a kind of a pretty classic example. And it's it got me thinking about how it's kind of like maybe it's more useful instead of thinking about what do I want to be, but it's like what do I want to do? What are the things that I actually want to just sit down and actually do and get on with that I enjoy and I'm comfortable with and I kind of find satisfying and fun and really letting those take me to where I'm going to be rather than this kind of so yeah, no, I think that was what I was all about. Really, I'm like, well, this is kind of the sort of thing I enjoy doing. So I'm gonna,
It's
and
a
that carried on through my career. You know, and even now, like I'm going to kind of come full circle and be like, there are all these different aspects of of community management and the work that we do. And I think that as I've got older, I focused a little bit more on the kind of data analytics side of it, because ultimately that was something that once I dug into it, I realized, I really enjoy doing this. I really enjoy the logic of working through and building these kind of systems versus maybe some of the creative work that I kind of thought I enjoyed, which I still do, but scratches a different itch.
from fighter pilot to writer to analytics. I love just the
Okay.
wildness of everything going on
Another
there.
day in the life of a community manager.
Right. And I love what you said is find something you love doing in your job. It's a very mature way to look at it, right? Because you don't really understand that concept when you're younger. Because at the end of the day, your job's going to be your job. And quite frankly, it's a job for a reason. It's not always going to be fun. But if you can find a task that you like, if you like something that you do from within your job, I think that's the best way anyone can look at that, because that's what you're going to have to do every day and you're going to love doing it. It was just some awesome stuff that you said there that I really liked it. I just kind of learning about yourself along the way and kind of riding that high. I feel like that's the best way to go about doing it. With that being said, James, that's all I have for you today. Is there anything else you want to just talk about or share with our audience?
No, I think it's been pretty comprehensive chat. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad we got to talk about. I mean, I'm sure that those listening to this know that they can kind of follow up with us, and obviously anybody that whatever stage they are at building a community for their game, we're always up for a chat and to understand how we can offer advice or offer direct support. But I'm yeah. Otherwise, yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate what you put together here. I think it's a great job. So yeah,
Yeah, I appreciate it.
kudos to
Before
you.
you go, I'm going to ask one last question: is what is the hardest channel to moderate?
Hardest channel to moderate? YouTube.
YouTube. That's not
Yeah,
the answer I saw
the
coming.
tools are.
Uh,
I mean, it's particularly live streams on YouTube. I mean, historically, YouTube used to attract a lot of let's call them interesting comments. I think it's probably gone a lot better now. But I know that live streams on Discord that unfortunately the tool sets are a little bit not quite where they are with Twitch. So I know that that's technically one of the most been one of the more difficult ones for us to moderate. But
all right. Well, James Gallagher is the head of community management at Keyword Studios. He runs this great, cool practice that helps you grow your community, protect your community, keep them safe, and just help you grow your game. We'll have information about James as well as kind of how you can get in touch with him on our Player Engage website. We'll also be posting about it on social media. So, James, thank you so much for coming in here today, teaching us about this, giving us a high level of community management and how to focus. I love the conversation. I learned a lot myself. So, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
likewise, thank you, Greg.